Okay, today we're going to start lesson 9.3, which is graphing quadratic functions. A quadratic function, now you don't need to write this down, just look at the graph, okay? A quadratic function, write down the sentence at the top, I'm sorry. Every quadratic function has a U-shaped graph, and that graph is called a parabola. Not a parabola, a parabola, okay? And this parabola looks like these two images that I have here. This first one is a parabola that goes up. And I know that because the arrows are facing up, or it opens upward. Now, the second parabola that I have is a U-shaped graph that is facing downwards. And I know that because the arrows at the end are pointing downwards. These are both types of parabolas that you will see often. And there's a way that I will know for each graph which way they open up or down before I even graph the parabola. Quadratic functions, okay? Vertex. So let's talk about some of the pieces to this quadratic graph here, this parabola. All right? The first part, and almost probably the most important part that you will see, and it's down here at the very bottom, that is called your vertex. Okay? The vertex is either going to be the highest or lowest point on your graph, okay? It is where the, it's basically called the vertex. It's where your graph comes to a vertex. It's either going to be at the bottom if your parabola opens up, or if your parabola opens down, it's going to be at the very top, okay? Also, in this parabola, we have what we call the axis of symmetry. All that means is it's the line that passes through the vertex. It's going to go directly through my vertex, and it divides this parabola into two equal parts, okay? In order to find the axis of symmetry, all I really need to know is where the vertex is. Because if I know where the vertex is, I know where my axis of symmetry is. Okay, it's just a line drawn through the vertex. All right, so whenever I have a quadratic function, so let's go ahead and talk about the actual equations of a quadratic function. Okay, we have y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. And these functions are called a quadratic because it has an x squared in it. Now, it's a function because it has a y and an x. And for every input, I have exactly one output. Now, for this equation here, a, b, and c will all represent numbers. So if I were to have this equation, something like you would see y equals 2x squared plus 4x plus 6, okay? Let's label A, B, and C because that's what I always want you to get used to doing because you're going to need to know what those values are. So in this equation, A is equal to 2, B is equal to 4, and C is equal to 6. Now notice I did not say A is equal to 2x squared because that's not what A is. A is only the number in front of x squared. So A is equal to 2. All right? Now, on that last slide that we just had, I showed you graphs of parabolas. One parabola looks like this, and the other looked like this. And I told you there was a way to know if it was going to open up or down before I even graphed it. And that is right here, these next 2 points. If A is a positive number, then our parabola is going to open up. If A is a negative number, then our parabola will open down, okay? So this equation right here, which way would our parabola open, up or down? Up, very good, because I have a positive 2. All right, now, the very most important point to find on your parabola is that vertex. After I find the vertex, I can go from there and find out exactly where my parabola is going to go. And there is a formula that you have to memorize in order to find the vertex. That formula is right here. X equals negative b over 2a. You're going to find those values, b and a, from the values that we have right here in our quadratic function. Okay, so let's find the vertex of this equation or function that I just gave you. So let's plug in our numbers. X equals negative b. I know that b is 4, so negative 4 over 2 times a, which is 2. All right, I get negative 4 over 4, which is equal to negative 1. Now, a vertex is a point on the graph, okay? So it's a coordinate. Now, when I have an ordered pair, this is an ordered pair. So when I have an ordered pair, it's always what, comma, what? X, comma, y, okay? And I already know what X is, but do I know what Y is? No. So I still have to find that. Just because I use that formula to find the vertex does not mean that's where I stop. That's how you find your X. Now, once you find your X, it's pretty simple to find what Y is. Because all I've got to do is I just take this X that I found, and everywhere I see an X in my equation, I will plug that in and solve for Y. Okay? This is the part where you're going to want to use your calculator. These problems can get pretty lengthy. Okay? So you're going to want to use your calculator so you're not sitting there and spending 30 minutes on a problem. So what you want to do here is whenever you find out what X is equal to, okay, you would take your calculator, and I'm going to plug this equation in exactly as I see it, except for where the X's are, I'm going to plug in the number that I found for X. So I'm going to leave Y equals off, obviously, and I'm going to go 2 times negative 1 squared plus 4x, or 4 times negative 1, plus 6. Once I do that, my calculator right there says that Y is equal to 4. All right, so now I know exactly where my vertex is. Okay, Y is equal to 4. Now, I found my Y. I know my vertex. I know which way my parabola is going to open. It's going to open up. Now, let's talk about the axis of symmetry. We said earlier that the axis of symmetry just goes directly through the vertex. So when someone tells you to say, tell me what the axis of symmetry would be, they only want to know the X value for the axis of symmetry. So all I've got to do is look at my vertex and go, okay, what's the X value of my vertex? Negative 1. So my axis of symmetry is going to be X equals negative 1. Okay? That's all you got to do for that. All right, so let's do an example and let's put this into practice, okay? They want us to complete the steps. Tell whether the graph opens up or down, find the coordinates of the vertex, and write the equation for the axis of symmetry. Now remember, the equation for the axis of symmetry just means X equals whatever the vertex is. Okay, so let's just look at this and say whether the graph opens up or down. Y equals 5x squared plus 10x plus 7. Callie, does this graph open up or down? Who can help her out? Up. Very good. And I know that because I look at the value for A. What's the value for A, Josh? If my equation is Y equals AX squared plus BX plus C. Okay, let's label A, B, and C. A is equal to 5, B is equal to 10, and C is equal to 7. That way I know, okay, if A is positive, my graph opens up. If A is negative, my graph opens down. So I look at what A is. A is a positive 5. So I know that my graph is going to open up. So I'm going to write underneath this, up. All right, first step complete. Step number 2, find the coordinates of the vertex or the ordered pair for the vertex. So that formula that you have to memorize for the vertex is X equals negative B over 2A. All right, let's plug in our values for this. X equals negative B, which is negative 10, over 2 times A, which is 5. x equals negative 10 over 2 times 5 is 10. And x is equal to negative 1. All right, so for my vertex, I know now that my x value is negative 1. How do I find my y value? Plug it back into the equation, okay? So I have this equation right here, y equals 5x squared plus 10x plus 7. Let's plug that negative 1 everywhere I see an x. So I'm going to write y equals 5 times negative 1 squared plus 10 times negative 1 plus 7. Okay, let's plug exactly what I see here into my calculator so I can find exactly what y equals. All right, does anybody have what y equals? 2, very good, okay? So I know that y is equal to 2. So I plug that into my vertex. All right, and now I have the second part. Now the third part of this is they say, write the equation for the axis of symmetry. Now remember, I already know my axis of symmetry because I found my vertex. The axis of symmetry is only the x value of the vertex. So I'm going to write x equals what, Madison? Negative 1. Very good. So this is my equation for the axis of symmetry. And that's all that you're doing for these problems. All right, let's do the second one now. I'm going to erase all this that's on here. And I have y equals 2x squared. Now, I know that a quadratic equation is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. But do you see a bx and a c here? No. Whenever you do not see a part to the equation, automatically assume that they are zeros. Basically, that's what you have here. 2x squared plus 0x plus 0. When there's nothing to write like a 0, they just leave it off completely. Okay? So, first of all, let's label A, B, and C. A is equal to 2, B is equal to 0, and C is equal to 0. Let's tell whether the graph opens up or down. Scooter, does the graph open up or down? Up. Very good. And I know that because A is positive. So I'm going to write up. All right. Let's find the coordinates of the vertex. Delina, what is that formula to find the vertex? Anybody remember? Very good. X equals negative B over 2 times A. Okay, so let's plug in our values for that. X equals negative 0 over 2 times 2. What's 0 over 4, basically? 0. So I know that my x value of my vertex is going to be 0. Now I've got to find my y. So let's plug this in. Now, at this part, when you go to plug the x in, it's not necessary to plug it into these two problems back here. All you would need to do is do y equals 2 times 0 squared. That's going to be pretty easy. Y equals 0, because 0 squared is 0 times 2 is 0. So now I have my vertex, 0, 0. And let's find the equation for the axis of symmetry. In order to find the equation for the axis of symmetry, I look at my vertex and I say my axis of symmetry is just the x value of the vertex. So I'm going to write x equals 0. Okay? That's how you would find those three parts. Now, let's move on to the fun part, which is graphing. Okay? So go ahead and write these 3 steps down. These are steps that you are going to want to go back and look at. So I suggest you write them down and you know them. Because on the test or quiz, I'm not going to give you the steps. I'm going to say, here's the equation, graph it. And you're going to need to know the steps you have to follow. So, find the x-coordinate of the vertex. Find the x-coordinate of the vertex. Then you want to find the y. So basically, you want to find the entire vertex. Then, make a table of values using the x values to the left. And I forgot to put something on here, and it's supposed to be and right. Then, plug those values into the equation and graph each point. Connect them with a smooth curve to form the parabola. All right, I'll give you a second to write this down. All right. Okay, graph the quadratic function. Graph the quadratic function. Y equals x squared minus 2x minus 3. Okay, step number 1 was find the x coordinate of the vertex. So, before I do that, let's label A, B, and C. Okay, A is equal to, what's that number in front of x squared that I don't see but I know is there? 1. What does B equal? -2. What does C equal? -3. Okay? Let's plug it in and find the x value of my vertex. X is equal, what if B is already negative and it wants me to put a negative B there? It makes it a positive. So I'm going to put +2 over 2 times 1. 2 over 2 is equal to 1. Now I know what my x value of the vertex is. Now I move on to step number 2, which is make a table of values. Okay, we've made table of values before, but I want you to do this one a little bit different. My table of values is going to be completely centered around that vertex, okay, or the x value of the vertex. So I'm going to make an x and y chart. And I want to do 2 values that are smaller than that vertex and 2 values that are larger. So what I want to do is I want to write that 1 directly in the middle of the chart. And then I'm going to do 2 numbers that are smaller. So 0 and -1. 2 numbers that are larger, 2 and 3. Now this is where you're going to use your calculator. Because now all I have to fill in are the values for y. So let's get our calculator out, and I'm going to use the exact equation that I have up here. Y equals x squared minus 2x minus 3. And everywhere I see an x, I'm going to start plugging in these values. So I'm going to start with -1. So I'm going to plug in. I always want to put the negative number in parentheses when you're working in your calculator. So in parentheses, -1 squared minus 2 times -1 minus 3. My calculator tells me that my value for that is 0. Okay, let's plug in the next number. I'm going to have 0 squared minus 2 times 0 minus 3. That gives me a -3. All right, let's plug in the 1. 1 squared minus 2 times 1 minus 3. I get a -4. All right, let's plug in the 2. 2 squared minus 2 times 2 minus 3. -3. Then last one, 3 squared minus 2 times 3 minus 3. And I get 0. Now look at this chart. I started plugging in the 1 and I got a 0. I plugged in 0 and I got a -3. Then I plugged in my vertex and I got -4. But what happened with these last 2 numbers? They were exact duplicates of what I had over here. And guess what? If you use 2 numbers that are bigger, 2 numbers that are smaller, that will always happen. So technically, if you wanted to, all you would have to do is find the first 3 values. Then you would automatically know the last 2 because it's always going to be the exact same numbers. So 0 and -3 on the other side of that vertex is going to be -3, 0. So if I had a box of 2, 4, 6, then the other values are going to be 4, 6. And I will never have to plug that in. So that saves you a little bit of time there. And it will always be that way. But one thing that you have to make sure is that you always have 2 values that are smaller and 2 values that are larger. Okay? So let's graph this now. So I want you to get out your graph paper. And we're going to graph this together. Let's make our x and y axis. label my numbers. And I'm just going to go up to 5. You don't have to go much larger than that. Oops. Because I know what my values are already going to be. All right, now I just need to start plotting my points. The first point that I want to plot is -1, 0. So I go to the -1 on the x-axis, and since y is 0, I don't move anywhere. Then I'm going to go to 0 on the x-axis and down to the -3. And I go over to the 1, down to the -4. Over to the 2, to the -3. Then over to the 3, to the 0. Okay? Now, these dots right here form a U. So all I've got to do now is I want to start and I just want to connect all of these dots, and I now have a parabola. Okay? Make sure that you always draw your line nice and larger than the dots you have. Do not do a graph that looks like that. Okay, that's not what I want. I want the lines to extend through that last dot. And right here on this parabola, where is my vertex? Okay, my vertex is going to be right down here. It's the lowest point on this graph. Okay, and if I wanted to, I could draw my axis of symmetry, which you don't have to do this, but I would draw my axis of symmetry directly down the center so it goes through my vertex. Okay? That is how you graph a quadratic function.